For all of us in New York, where we are now, where we pay 10% income tax, you actually give every citizen in Alaska a check.
We are the only state with a negative tax rate, where we don't have an income, sales, or property tax statewide. And yes, we have a share of our oil resource revenue goes back to the people who own the resources. Imagine that.
Yeah. You're in the middle of a big debate now in Alaska over the stimulus. And there's you and a couple of other governors, but you in particular have pointed out that this stimulus money from Washington comes with a lot of strings attached.
It sure does. Yeah. The whole stimulus package, you know, I'm looking at it now thinking, what the heck happened with that thing? Now, when it was first crafted, Congress was asked to vote on it without even knowing what was in it. Many of the Republicans voted against it and encouraged states to really have a heads up regarding what was in it and the strings attached to it. So those governors, like me, we paid attention to that. We said, you know, we'll dig into there and we will make sure that we know what those strings are. So we saw the fat strings attached to these dollars, the least of which is the contribution to the federal government's dizzying debt that we're handing to our kids. Yeah. But many other specific strings tied to buckets of money. So a lot of us governors said we didn't want all of the dollars. Infrastructure dollars, good. Let's go build roads and water system and sewer systems, appropriate tools that government should provide for the private sector. But just growing government, we didn't want to accept all those funds. So lawmakers, though, around the nation, many bodies, legislatures decided to resolve to take the money anyway, going around the governors. So we saw a lot of that.
But now you're in a little bit of a battle, too, even within the state over the acceptance of the stimulus dollars, and that you've actually made a point last week of saying those strings that I told you about are real.
They're real. They're real. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's the status of that?
Right. Well, I vetoed a bucket of the money. Not a whole lot. We did accept education dollars and infrastructure dollars, but dollars that were tied to universal energy building codes for Alaska, kind of a one-size-fits-all building code that isn't going to work up there in Alaska, and really it prohibits opportunity to build and to develop, and just wasn't going to work up there in Alaska. So I vetoed a bucket of that money. Our lawmakers now are considering the override of the veto, which is cool. That's checks and balances. You know, they can explore
you don't want them
that. I don't think that it would be a healthy thing for our state to adopt, because it would be a federal mandate, big centralized government, telling Alaskan communities that have opted out of building codes for the most part, them telling us what's best for our businesses and our residences, how to build them. And we're all for energy conservation. We have hundreds of millions of dollars, in fact, budgeted for programs there, but we don't want those fat strings attached where centralized big government is going to tell us what is best.
What do you make of, look at the state of the economy now. I mean, just last week, when unemployment went from 8.9% to 9.4%, we quadrupled the deficit in a year. CBO says we're going to have literally $10 trillion in debt at the end of 10 years, where we're paying almost $1 trillion on interest on the debt. You're a governor, you have to balance budgets. What does that mean in terms of the overall economy? What are your thoughts on it?
Well, when you consider that the federal government is about $11 trillion in debt, and we're borrowing more to spend more, it defies any sensible economic policy that any of us ever learned going through college, defies economy practices and principles that tell you got to quit digging that hole when you are in that financial hole. Yeah. America is digging a deeper hole. And how are we paying for this government largesse? We're borrowing from China. And when you consider that now we own 60% of General Motors, or the U.S. government does, but who is the U.S. government becoming more and more indebted to? It's China. So that leads you to have to ask, who really is going to own our car industry then in America?
You know, but it does harken back a little to the campaign. I mean, spread the wealth, patriotic duty.
Kind of a we told you so?
Well, is that how you feel?
That's how I feel. I feel like, and I think that more and more constituents are going to kind of open their eyes now and open their ears to hear what's really going on and realize, okay, maybe we didn't have a good way of expressing that, articulating that message of here is what America could potentially become if we grow government to such a degree that we cannot pay for it, and we have to borrow money from other countries, some countries that don't necessarily like America.
Tim Geithner got laughed at in China last week. Is this even more than you thought it was going to be in terms of where the president would take the economy?
What what's more than I thought would be is we're hearing a lot of good rhetoric. A lot of this is wrapped in good rhetoric, but we're not seeing those actions. And this many months into the new administration, quite disappointed, quite frustrated with not seeing those actions to rein in spending, slow down the growth of government. Instead, Sean, it's the complete opposite. It's expanding at such a large degree that if Americans aren't paying attention, unfortunately, our country could evolve into something that we do not even recognize. Certainly that is so far from what the founders of our country had in mind for us. Well, that is where we are headed. That is, and we have to be blunt enough and candid and honest enough with Americans to let them know that if we keep going down these roads, nationalizing many of our services, our projects, our businesses, yes, that is where we would head. And that's why Americans have to be paying attention. And we have to have our voices heard. And ultimately, it needs to be our will, the American people's will, imposed on Washington instead of the other way around.
Do you think that maybe people are changing their mind, maybe waking up a little bit to the fact, and you spent some time with President Obama. What'd you think of him?
Very nice man, very nice man. I do think, though, that as more and more Americans are tuning into the discussion on the value-added tax, for instance, they're going to start saying, God, yeah, you know, you're right. The only way that we're going to pay for this largest national sales tax is going to affect every single one of us and take away more opportunities and freedoms to grow, to progress, especially with our small businesses. As more people pay attention to that discussion on the only way to pay for this government largesse is a value-added tax, borrowing more money, not drilling for our own domestic supplies of resources, but being even more reliant on foreign sources as we're headed if we say no to offshore drilling, if we keep ANWR locked up, if we're not aggressive about getting Alaska's natural gas pipeline.
Let me talk about the pipeline, because you're in the natural gas pipeline in Alaska right now. There's a little bit of a controversy, and what's the status on that? And do you think we have look, price of oil is going up again?
The price of a barrel of oil is going up. There is greater demand for natural gas. It is increasing. We have to tap those North Slope reserves, and we're on target to do that. And in about a week, we have some really good, exciting news that we get to give the rest of America on how it is that we're going to build that infrastructure. The private sector will build the infrastructure, will flow very rich resources of natural gas into the lower 48 states.